Hi everyone, it's Raina. So this video is if you have your Sun in Gemini and Capricorn rising. This is an awkward combination, so it's no surprise that when two planets are 150 degrees apart, as these are, not all of you will have this particular angle, but it could form. It's called an inconjunction, and it's considered very awkward because the elements involved are very disparate. They don't have common ground. So we're talking about the air and the earth. And if you think about it, air is way up there and the earth is down there. And so in that sense, the earth is very practical. And it's all about, how can I prove that something is real? Well, I can taste it, I can smell it, I can see it, I can hear it, or I could touch it. And other than that, it's iffy. The air, you can't do that, right? So how do you even know that air exists? It's only when air moves, it affects other things, like it blows a leaf, that you can sense its presence or you can feel it on your skin. Your skin is tangible, but the air isn't. So you may feel like you have one foot firmly on the ground, but then this other part of you is, somewhere else. Air is very abstract. And but I do feel that the one of the things that these two elements have in common is that they are detached. And I always say that the water and the fire are emotional. And so they have that in common, even though they can be awkward too, being together. So what may, because the rising sign can be, to me, your earlier conditioning, so how life showed up for you in your family of origin, for instance. And that can really set the tone for your life as a whole. And I believe that some of the behaviors that the rising sign can demonstrate are connected to defense mechanisms, especially if there's a difference between the sun and the ascendant, like there is here, where it just is very incongruous. It just doesn't fit. That it's inharmonious in some way. That can be something where you try to fit into your family of origin by being like them, and then when you get older, you're more like your sun sign. So let me tell you how this may have manifested for you. You may have grown up feeling like you had to fend for yourself. And this could have been for many different reasons. This could be that you could have been born in a wealthy situation with your parents working all the time or socializing, whatever, and you were raised with the hired help instead of your parents, and so emotionally you felt alone. This can actually be physical, where you were not given that guidance that children typically are, and you had to find everything out for yourself. If you needed funds for school, maybe you had to figure out how to get them, or you even from an early age worked. Maybe not when you were in elementary school, but maybe the first chance you got to get a work permit. I think in the United States, I don't think you can be younger than 15 to get a work permit, but maybe you babysat and you really cultivated some kind of little home business so that you could make ends meet and to meet your own needs. And that's called resourcefulness. And that is not bad because that is a survival skill. But the problem is that we don't want to be in survival mode our whole life. And so I feel like our rising sign kind of loses its primary influence, as we get older. But it's always there to some degree, and it may show up when you feel vulnerable that you kind of fall back on that. You may be a workaholic, and this may be the one trait that you carry through your whole life, because I think that could very well be the case, because you might feel as if at any time you might not have that structure in your life, that safety net. So you want to maintain it. You want to make sure that you always have something to fall back on. And because the rising sign, the ruler of the rising sign is your ruler. You can also say your sun's ruler is your ruler. So you could say you're ruled by Saturn, because that's the ruler of the chart, as well as Mercury. But in terms of Saturn, there can be that feeling of wanting foundations, wanting organization, being disciplined. And those are great qualities to carry through life, unless a person overemphasizes them due to other factors. Like, for instance, if your Venus is in Cancer in particular, you may have a tendency to be very, I don't know if I'd say fear-based about money, but definitely security-minded. Venus can be your attitude towards money. And so that kind of thing. And if your moon is in Cancer, or any of the water signs or the earth signs, you may be more fiscally conservative throughout your lifetime. But one of the things that the rising sign represents is how somebody carries themselves, their demeanor. And this can be somebody who comes across very somber, very serious. When you're young, you might be like a curmudgeon, even a little bit, where you kind of frown upon other children playing, and you think that that's so immature. You may kind of prefer to be around adults, because Saturn is father time. It rules old age. So you may not feel like you fit into that with other children, and therefore adults may look at you as, kind of precocious in a certain way, but it can lead to the parentified child, and that can mean that you are given extra, what would we call it, responsibilities at home, but also at school. They may look to you, the teachers and other authority figures may see you as the most competent or the most capable, and you usually are in any situation. You're usually the one who is, mature, level-headed, not somebody who's kind of like losing it. Although, again, I'm just talking about Capricorn rising. I'm not factoring in your sun sign, because Gemini can be quite ADD. It can be very childlike and even maybe childish sometimes, or irresponsible because of a love of freedom, very into variety. But I'm just focusing on the Capricorn influence and what might have happened when you were growing up in school, and you might have been the teacher's pet because of that. And at the same time, and also the teacher's pet because you might have been very good in school. You might have done very well in school because you might have been very intelligent and clever. Gemini is ruled by Mercury, so it tends to excel in intellectual pursuits. Of course, you're always going to get a Gemini person who might have a learning disability, and that keeps them, and that would be really frustrating to have dyslexia, for instance, and be a Gemini, because Geminis love to read and they love to learn. And yet, it has nothing to do with a person's innate intelligence. It's the way that they decode letters or lack thereof, or they have a hard time decoding letters. But I'm just saying that in general, you will tend to excel in school, do very well, and be ambitious about it to boot, where other kids your own age might just be interested in playing. You might be really goal-oriented from a young age and very serious about it. And this may even be exacerbated if you feel like you're having to fend for yourself, because from a young age, you might say to yourself, I only have myself to rely on. So I'm going to try to do these things because I want to get ahead. And other kids might not even think about getting ahead until they're much older. But you have so in a way you could say you have a leg up on them. And that sort of thing. Physically, you may have wonderful bone structure. You may be a conservative dresser. Even when you're young, you may kind of dress like an old person, dress traditionally. It's funny, I was noticing the other day when I was out, these young women, and they were all dressed in kind of conservative sort of garb, like these dresses. And then I kind of figure out maybe they're religious women, and that's just kind of like how they dress. But they weren't like, they weren't like Mormons or Amish or anything like that. I'm not talking about that way. They were like regular dresses. It wasn't like a special religious costume. And so that's the kind of thing that I would imagine for some people that are born with Capricorn rising in general, is that they tend to dress rather formally, even when they're in their off hours. The men may have a hard time wearing t-shirts and jeans. They might think that's sloppy, and that just indicates leisure, which they might think that's the devil's playground, and that they have to always look like they're doing something productive. And the women might either be very formally dressed as well, or they just might be very traditional and have, the earth signs are feminine signs. So the women may accentuate that and dress a very feminine way with a lot of skirts and dresses, even in the current times. And you might even be quite introverted for a Gemini, because the ascendant can be how you behave around other people. You might be a little bit reserved. Saturn can actually make someone restricted in their, self-expression. And so it's kind of like, it's funny because we talk about the term conservative, and really people just automatically jump to political affiliation, but conserve means to save, right? So if somebody is acting in a conservative way, they might be conserving their reactions. They might limit their reactions to what they really need to convey. So with Capricorn rising, it might not be very flashy, the person who's expressing themselves. You might be very stoic. And that's frustrating for Gemini, because Gemini is a very lively sign. And so you may feel like you're kind of trapped in this tomb of solemnity, for lack of a better word that I can use for it. But yeah, something like that. And I think, there's a saying that as the Capricorn person, in your case, influence person, gets older, they get younger. So that's called youthing, meaning that you're becoming more, you start looking more younger. Maybe you look like an old man or woman when you're a little kid. Look at your class pictures when you're in grade school. And then when you have accomplished your goals, and this is what I read, then you can relax and you can start to let your hair down. And because you already have a sun sign in Gemini, which is playful spirit, that's not going to be hard to do. You may just feel like you want to really get your foundation set, and then you can play. And it'll be really sweet because you'll have come from the background of really getting your house in order and all of the fun things that you want to do, because Gemini just loves, so many different things. You may have like a variety of interests, and you may feel like now you can fully engage in them, not worried about just the basics of survival, because you have that nailed down. And I think so I feel like this combination, when you get older, and I'm talking about after your first Saturn return, remember you're ruled by Saturn. So Saturn is a very important theme in your life. But after that first Saturn return, when supposedly you're supposed to be going into adulthood officially, that might be when you start to youth, because you might be one of those people, and there are people out there where you own your own home in your 20s, where you have your own business, right away. You might, I was going to say, as a Gemini person, even though you have the right stuff for college and even advanced degrees, you might choose not to do that, because you might say, you know what, they can't teach me anything that I need to know. And you might be one of those people who drops out of college and just starts your own business or what have you, because maybe you don't even go to college. But I would imagine that some of you do go to college and you get to see what is being taught, and then you realize, I don't need this. And your playful spirit can come out more and more as you get older. There's a youthful quality. I even call it, like, for the men, like a Peter Pan kind of an effect. I don't know the female equivalent. Tinkerbell? I don't know. But yeah, where the person is just very youthful, and they give that off their whole life. And so I think that this can be a very powerful combination, as awkward as it might seem. And, then you can really, I think this combination is great for humor. For instance, I was talking in another video about the deadpan humor of Capricorn, but you have the sarcasm of the Gemini, which is kind of similar in nature, but sometimes more flamboyant. And this can be a very amusing individual in their own right. All right, that's what I have for you. I hope that this resonated. If you would like a private reading, the link is below. Take care. Bye.